Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And if you happen to be Christian, hello. If you happen to be Jewish, shalom. And if you happen to be an atheist, well, how the hell are you? First of all, thank you for having me in this incredibly auspicious period of celebration and festivities. I think every once in a while it's important that we remember and remind others around us that our religion isn't all about boring things and prayers and fasting and rituals, but we can also celebrate. So thanks for having me in this great institution. Go Scarlet Knights. I don't know, we had to look it up on Wikipedia, so do excuse me if that entry is outdated. So it's a tricky question. If you lose your faith or find yourself drifting away, what do you do? And I think the first thing we need to do is figure out why that happens. And I think there are lots of reasons as to why someone might drift away or feel that faith is no longer relevant in their lives. After all, it's a very challenging time to be religious, let alone be Muslim. Adhering to any religious practice is falling out of fashion. It has been falling out of fashion for quite some time. In fact, so much that people since the 1960s and 70s have been talking about the end of faith, and that soon, is what they will tell you, soon religion will be completely thrown out the window. No one will want anything to do with faith or religion. It's the era of science, of space exploration, of great advancements in medicine and pretty much every other field. And so religion is taking a back seat. Now, of course, the reality is that religion seems that it's here to stay. But that doesn't mean that it's not challenging to be religious. It's not any easier today to maintain faith and to continue to practice the tenets of your faith than it was before. But again, there are lots of reasons as to why that could happen on an individual level or the level of society at large. It could be, and perhaps I'll choose some of the reasons that are more relevant to our day and age. It could be the misapplications of religion. After all, with the demonic, diabolical, maniacal threat of ISIS very present in our lives, on the news, but also in our own lives, especially if you come from the Middle East and other regions where terror attacks are a daily occurrence. You look at ISIS, and even as a devout Muslim man or woman, you find yourself asking, is this really my religion? They call themselves the true Muslims, the people who follow the righteous predecessors, the early Muslims. Their motto is to return Islam to its pure, unadulterated form, as it was practiced in the time of the Prophet or immediately thereafter. So then you look at their misapplication of the teachings of this religion, and some people find themselves in a position where they need to distance themselves from this religion. You might look at the way hijab is imposed in certain societies, certainly within terrorist groups, which happen to be very puritanical in their approach. And so part of their modus operandi is that they will impose a very strict version of hijab. And so even as a hijabi, you might start asking yourself, well, is this the right thing to do? If ISIS does it, then certainly there is something wrong with it. And so what happens is that you find yourself moving from one extreme to another. That's one of the challenges of terrorist groups that are tearing apart the very fabric of society as well as religious practice in the Middle East. You oscillate from one extreme to the other, from religious fundamentalism and extremism to extreme ideological liberalism, from believing that you are right and that everybody else is going straight to the bottomless pit of the inferno, to adopting extreme philosophical perennialism, or what we commonly know as pluralism. Pluralism in the sense, not in the political sense, but rather in the ideological sense, that everybody is right. There is no one truth. There is your truth, there is my truth, there's another truth. It just depends on which side of the truth you happen to be standing on. So it's a matter of descriptions, it's a matter of interpretations, it's a matter of definitions, it's a matter of how you see your own version of the truth. Now, other than the fact that this is plain absurd, there is truth. Sometimes claims made by differing religions are mutually exclusive, right? Jesus is either God or not God. It can't be both, right? Islam is either true or not true. Judaism's fundamental tenets of the faith are either true or not true. The same goes with any claim, right? These are mutually exclusive claims. You can't have them both ways. You can't say that they're all right and it's just a matter of your perspective or interpretation. My point, and of course, these are matters for debate for a very long time, and I think, and I kind of discuss this in my book, Our Beliefs, at the very end in the appendix. I say, look, we need to be able to distinguish between believing that there is a standard by which you can measure the truth, while also be accepting towards the other. We have to be able to reconcile between the fact that there is a standard definition of the truth, and at the same time, while you and I can disagree on the most fundamental matters of belief, we could still get along. We could still live together. We could still coexist, right? And I think that's where some religious fundamentalists and extremists lose the plot, and that they conflate one with the other. So the first reason that might cause some people to drift and to feel distanced from religion is the misapplications of that religion. That's one. The other is misconceptions, right? Misconceptions are, generally speaking, more intellectual challenges. So, for example, the thought, the idea that hijab is anti-women. If you're able to instill that thought in a society, then it makes it very easy to suppress hijab, to force women to take off the hijab. It's intellectual terrorism at its most manifest form, right? We see this in some societies, in the Muslim world as well as the non-Muslim world. France is a classic example. When you demonize a religious practice to the point where, I don't know if you saw this a couple of days ago, I was deeply disturbed, honestly disturbed, when I saw this video of a French Muslim woman. Now obviously, there wasn't any context to the video, but at least from what you could gather by simply watching the short clip and the captions that were going around social media, this Muslim woman is wearing the face veil or the burqa or the niqab or whatever you want to call it. And because it's illegal to do so in France, she was being beaten and dragged by a number of police officers on the streets of Paris. And I thought to myself, well, whatever happened to liberté? You know, this is at the very core of the French Revolution. This concept of individual liberty, this concept of freedom. But of course, once you've been able to successfully demonize it, once you've been able to convince the majority of the people that hijab is anti-women, that hijab is oppressive, that hijab is a backward relic from a bygone era, it then becomes easy to impose laws that prevent hijab from being worn. I mean, again, whatever happened to the idea that a woman should be able to wear what she wants, whenever she wants? A woman, a man, a child? I mean, it's not up to the state to decide those things. But my point is that sometimes people drift away from religion when certain ideas are instilled in them or in the wider society, and that really, really complicates things. If I came to the stage and I said, what is this fasting, for example? What is hijab? What is prayer? What is hajj? It's ridiculous. In some quarters, certainly not here tonight, but in some quarters I'd probably get a standing ovation. And we see this. Pseudo scholars and theologians pretending to be educated in Islam, who are out to do the bidding on behalf of Islamophobes, are growing like mushroom, and they are being very well received by the same people who are avowed and sworn enemies of Islam. People who are very open about their Islamophobia, very open about their hatred and bigotry towards all Muslims, suddenly find a darling within Muslim society because that individual happens to be the one who is doing their bidding on their behalf, right? And they'll openly say, thank God it's not us saying that we should ban all Muslims from immigrating to Western countries. It's another Muslim saying it for us. A self-hating Muslim, right? So that's the other reason. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just very brief look at the causes, because we want to focus on the solutions. Another reason why you might feel distance from faith is distractions. Now I'll take a bit of a Sufi sort of segue here, so to speak, and mention a prayer by Imam Zayn al-Abidin. Now Imam al-Sajjad has a famous prayer that is recommended that we recite this prayer around the time of dawn in the month of Ramadan. You'll know this prayer as Dua Abu Hamza al-Thumali. Abu Hamza al-Thumali isn't the one who created the dua or wrote the supplication, but rather he's the one who narrated it from Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. In this prayer, the Imam refers to at least 12 reasons as to why people don't really feel like praying. A common symptom. A lot of us go through this phase where prayer, religion, faith, spirituality in general is just, you're just not into it. So the Imam alludes to at least 12 reasons as to why that happens. I won't list them, but I'd like you to look it up. It's where the Imam says, Allahumma inni kullama qult قد تهيأت وتعبأت وقمت للصلاة بين يديك وناجيتك. Oh God, every time I say, now is the time for me to find my way back to God. Now is the time I need to get up and prepare myself for prayer. ألقيت علي نعاسا إذا أنا صليت. As soon as I want to do that, suddenly I feel sleepy. I feel lethargic. I feel tired. I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like going through with it. وَسَلَبْتَنِي مُنَاجَاتِكَ إِذَا أَنَا نَاجَيْتُكَ. It's as though you have stripped me from the joy of conversing with you. As soon as I want to get back on track, I feel down. I feel completely lethargic and disinterested. Then the Imam says, Mali. This is crucial. He doesn't say, oh God, what is the problem? He doesn't say, oh God, why do you do this to me? Rather, he says, Mali, what is wrong with me? What have I done? It's a moment of self-reflection. It's a moment of introspection. The Imam says, Mali, كلما قلت قد صلحت سريرتي. It's like every once in a while when you are left in the solitude of your own mind and you say to yourself, you know what, it's time I turn the boat back. It's time I really improve myself. I feel like not only am I not improving, but I'm walking backwards. I'm going in the wrong direction. I used to be better when I was younger. I used to be much more spiritual. I used to be much more devout. We all go through that. And so the Imam says, oh God, why is it that whenever I try to sit down and make a solemn commitment to turn around and be a better person, suddenly, عرضت لي بلية أزالت قدمي. Something happens and I slip again. Something goes wrong. سيدي لعلك عن بابك طردتني. Have you turned me away from your door, O Master? Have you decided that you no longer want to have anything to do with me? لعلك عن بابك طردتني وعن خدمتك نحيتني. You no longer want me to be at your service and your beck and call? أو لعلك رأيتني مستخفا بحقك فأقصيتني. This is where the Imam starts to list all the causes and the reasons as to how certain sins lead to people becoming distant from religion. Let me share a hadith here with you while I'm on the subject. Someone comes to Imam Zayn al-Abidin, the same Imam. He says to him, O son of the Messenger of God, you know how you say that if you commit sins and you're promiscuous and you don't give any regard to transgressions against God's law and so forth, that you'll be punished? But I'm not being punished. Look at me. I'm having the time of my life. I'm comfortable. I'm happy. I'm making a good living. I'm making a heck of a lot of money. Right? My life is exactly where I want it to be. So what happened to the punishment? I don't see any, chastisement coming from the heaven above. That's another question that's quite common as well. Well, how come? We see tyrants, we see despots, we see murderers, we see the most atrocious of criminals getting away with it every day. What's going on? He says to the Imam, how come I'm not being punished? You know what he says? He says, it's enough, it's sufficient punishment that God has stripped away from you the pleasure of His worship, the pleasure of conversing with Him. That's a big enough punishment, don't you think? That you're just not interested anymore, you don't care. It's like a husband and a wife who are in love one day, and then a few years back you come and they're no longer in love, they've fallen out of love. That in itself is a punishment. That's a state of affair you don't want to be in. So then the Imam says, why, oh God, what have I done so as to make myself deserving of this? Which is it? أو لعلك فقدتني من مجالس العلماء. Is it because that you no longer find me in gatherings of knowledge? In other words, I'm not interested in places where there is a more learned individual, regardless of the garb they happen to wear, who tells me what to do and what not to do. It's uncomfortable. A sermon by its nature is different from a lecture in the sense that a sermon is about moral standards. it should make you uncomfortable. If it doesn't, there's something wrong with the sermon. It should make you question your actions, your conduct, your behavior. If it doesn't, there's something wrong. And so is it the fact that I'm no longer interested in those sorts of gatherings, so you have decided to shun me? أو لعلك وجدتني في مقام الكاذبين فرفضتني. Or is it that you don't find me sincere enough? You think I'm lying, and so you have turned me away? أو لعلك رأيتني في الغافلين. Or is it because I'm constantly distracted? All I care about is entertainment, fun, having a good time. I contribute to my own distraction. And so you say, you know what, you want to be distracted? Go be distracted. Don't focus on the bigger questions in life. Don't focus on the meaning of life. Don't focus on the fact that we are only here for a very short amount of time on this pale blue dot of a planet that swims in an ocean of nothingness, and that at some point in the very close future I will die, and at the very least, even if I don't believe in God or the hereafter, at the very least there is the very distinct possibility that there is a life after death, that there is going to be questioning and reckoning and punishment and reward. Let's not think about those things. Let's just have our fun. Is that it, O Lord? Anyway, the Imam goes on and on. I'd like you to, this is your homework. Look it up. Dua Abu Hamza al-Thumali. In particular, the part where the Imam talks about why he feels lethargic and tired every time he wants to get back on track. But let's talk solutions. What do we do? The first solution, I'd like to propose maybe 2 or possibly 3 if we have time. The first is, we need to identify and uphold priorities and essentials, right? In other words, if you feel distance from faith, which, let's face it, most of us go through that phase, sometimes multiple times. Sometimes it has to do with the generation or the age demographic you happen to be in. You might be struggling with a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister who feels this way. And I think it's critical that we identify what constitute priorities, or let's call them the fundamental components of faith, and then uphold those. Let me give you an example. Say you have someone who's totally into being fit and healthy. And usually what you'll find is they'll go overboard, right? They'll go absolutely crazy. They might feel like they're a little overweight, so they need to lose that weight, or they just happen to be really into this kind of thing. So you'll find that they'll go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, and they'll work their butt off, and they'll go for the jog in the morning, and they'll ensure that everything they eat is, perfectly tuned with their objectives, their health objectives. They'll ensure that they don't eat anything that's not healthy, any junk food, any fast food, right? They'll go on these crazy diets. Right now, I think it's like veganism that's taken the world by storm. Everybody's a vegan now, right? Or they might be even more passionate about this to the point that they become fruitarian, right? I don't know if you knew this, but Steve Jobs was a fruitarian, which is why he called his company Apple. A fruitarian eats nothing but fruits. It's miserable, I know, but some people do that. You'll find them reading all kinds of articles about, this great new research about the superfood, vitamins, this, that, turmeric. There's so much articles coming out these days about turmeric, and the fact that it's one of the greatest anti-cancer foods ever, right? It's really amazing. Highly recommended, by the way. But the point is, you'll have these people doing this, and then they just can't maintain it. Why can't they maintain this kind of lifestyle? Well, maybe because their life is just too hectic to incorporate all these things. Or maybe because every time they walk out the door, they see nothing but big billboards of fat, juicy, succulent burgers 24/7. Or they go to the restaurant and they see these people sitting down eating a pizza with 5 different cheese toppings and 2 more stuffed into the crust. It's like the movie Inception of pizza. And so they can't maintain it. They give up. Now, the critical point in all of this is when they give up, which, let's face it, they will eventually, will they fall out of the wagon completely or not? And this is where we are, right here. We feel like faith, religion, spirituality, it's too hard to maintain. There's too much pressure out there. There's too much Islamophobia, right? And you feel down, so what do? Do you give up entirely or you don't? What I'm proposing is that you identify the fundamentals. Okay, fine, you don't want to work out 5 times a week? Don't. But don't start eating burgers for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You see what I mean? Try and maintain a basic minimum level of physical activity and avoid all the junk food. In other words, as the hadith says, اجتناب المحرمات أولى من اكتساب الحسنات. Avoiding sinful acts is more important than acquiring good deeds. So if the choice comes down to upholding the bare bones minimum of your faith and your spirituality, identify the bare bones minimum of your spirituality and hold on to it. And what that usually means is that avoid committing sins. One hadith says that if you pray 5 times a day, God will never ask you why you didn't perform all those great recommended prayers on the nights of Sha'ban. God will never ask you about prayer, right? The prophets, the imams, the great sages of our religion, they used to perform 1,000 units of prayer a day. Good for them. God will never ask you, well, why didn't you do that? As long as you hold on to the bare bones minimum, right? The hadith goes on, if you fast during the month of Ramadan, God will never ask you about all those other great recommended fasts. The beginning of the month, the end of the month, the middle of the month, right? The month of Rajab, the month of Sha'ban, forget it. Don't do that, don't go there. Just focus on the obligatory fast. If you go to Hajj once, He'll never ask you, why didn't you go to Hajj more? Even though it's highly recommended, it's brilliant, it's great. But He'll never ask you for those. In other words, hold on to the bare bones minimum. That is very important, brothers and sisters, to keep in mind, especially when dealing with a spiritual crisis of your own or that of a loved one. Sometimes we see parents, we do this to ourselves as well, but mostly it comes from the family, society, the community, parents. We see them putting too much pressure on their children. And I think the root of the problem stems from a lack of understanding of those priorities. What is a priority? Oh, you got that haircut, you're going to embarrass me in the community. Who cares about the haircut? Who cares about the community? Oh, you're wearing those weird clothes? Who cares? It doesn't matter. What matters is ensuring that that minimum level of spirituality is maintained. That haram is not being committed, you should be happy, you should be proud. Listen to this. The commander of the faithful says in Nahj al-Balagha, Imam Ali, he says that when I was forced into seclusion, you know, the Imam fought with the Prophet, struggled at every turn, every juncture, every war, every peace treaty. Ali ibn Abi Talib was always there at the forefront, defending Rasulullah. The Prophet would call out his name when he was in trouble. Ayna sayfi, where is my sword? They would say, your sword is in your own hand. He would say, no, I'm not talking about my sword. أين درعي? Where is my shield? There is your shield. No, I'm talking about something else. أين حبيبي علي? Where is my beloved dear Ali? He was always there. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. 23 years. And then right after that, another 25 years under house arrest, under seclusion, under neglect. He says that the difference between me and them during that 25-year period of seclusion and neglect is that I held on to the obligatory while they went and claimed to uphold the recommended. Which is why the tradition says, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ. The Prophet says this to Imam Ali. He says to him, Ya Ali, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ النَّاسِ تَشْتَغِلُ بِكَثْرَةِ الْعَمَلِ فاشتغل أنت بجودة العمل وإذا رأيت الناس تشتغل بالواجبات تشتغل بالمستحبات فاشتغل بالواجبات. If you see people concerned, overly concerned about recommended deeds, you should be concerned about obligatory deeds. Be concerned about the fundamentals rather than those on the fringes. If you look at salah, here's a practical example. Prayer. We always think of prayer as being a bit of a chore, right? Because it takes a bit of time. It has to happen at different intervals throughout the day and so on and so forth. One thing that a lot of people probably don't think about is that the actual obligatory part of prayer is incredibly short. Do you know what it is? So it's Allahu Akbar, Takbiratul Ihram, at the beginning of prayer. Then there is Surah Al-Hamd, or what's called Al-Qira'ah. According to some scholars, you don't even have to recite another surah afterwards. So it's Allahu Akbar, followed by Surah Al-Hamd. Then you go into Ruku'. And all you have to do is say Subhanallah 3 times. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhanallah. Then you go into Sujood. You can say any dhikr, by the way, whether it's Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. And all you do is say that 3 times, right? You do that. If the prayer is composed of 4 units, you repeat that 4 times. Then when you get to the tashahhud, the only compulsory part of it is shahadatan wa salawat. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Done. End of prayer. That's it. Let's make it simple. Let's go back to the basics. At a time when it's tougher and tougher to maintain your religion and spirituality, make it simple. Don't abandon it. Don't go munching on those burgers 24/7. Just maintain the basic minimum. Another issue is this, another solution if you like, is look, at the end of the day, let's say you have a parent, a father, who's just a very grumpy old person and difficult to deal with. I see a lot of people nodding. I mean, is it really that bad? Difficult to deal with. Sometimes it gets to the point where parents' intervention in their children's lives just is intolerable, right? For example, your father might be the type of person who's causing actual marital problems between you and your wife or husband. So what do? The solution is simple. You don't abandon him. You don't disown him. He is your father. She is your mother. You don't get to choose who your parents are. You're stuck with them forever in this life and the next. Tough luck. What you do though is you try and set your mind in a specific position, right? Number one, you remind yourself constantly that this is my father without whom I wouldn't be here. Without this person, I would not exist. My father and my mother, they spent everything they had to ensure that my life was comfortable. They would, according to one hadith, God says, mankind, O children of Adam, I gave you parents who would not eat until you were fed. They would not sleep until you went to bed. They would never be comfortable if you were ever sick. I gave you a parent I gave you a father and a mother to look after you. They would take any problem in life just to ensure that you were safe, that you were okay. The love, the compassion, the kindness, the generosity they showed you is unmatched. Nobody in the world loves you for you and no other reason without any reciprocity than your parents. Not your wife, not your husband, not your own kids. Nobody has that pure, unsullied love for you the way your parents did. You see how just making these affirmations, reminding yourself of these things, makes a difference. So yeah, he's grumpy. Yeah, he's old. Yeah, he's difficult to deal with. But you know what? He cared for me. And that was genuine, true love. And now I need to pay him back. See what I mean? Or you remind yourself of the famous hadith, which actually, it's not just a hadith, really. It's a physical law. The hadith says, Man barra abah barrahu waladuh. You show kindness to your father, your son will most certainly show kindness to you, and vice versa. You disrespect and insult your mother, you better know for a fact, read my lips, there will come a day when you will be reminded of the fact that you disrespected your mother because your own child. Call it karma, call it what goes around comes around, call it payback, whatever it is. This is a physical law, just like the law of gravity and electromagnetism. It will happen. Mark my words. So, there's the carrot and the stick. This is the stick part of the equation. That look, whichever way I deal with them, I will be dealt with. And so, things will start to fall into place. That you asking for your parents' prayers makes a difference in your life. Your own livelihood depends on your parents' satisfaction with you, their happiness with you. So you do the same with God. You do the same with God. I gave a lecture this past Muharram in Dearborn called, it was basically about some of the lesser known blessings of God. Because if I told you, think about your eyes or think about your ability to walk, your hands, I mean, these are things that we kind of are reminded of quite often because we use them all the time and they're more obvious than others. But there are these blessings that nobody even thinks about. For example, I mentioned 3. One of them was the blessing and the gift of the eyelids. The eyelids. And that was inspired by an interview that I read with a guy called Andreas Christophorus, if I'm not mistaken, who is a British man who had, by mistake, someone came to his door, knocked at the door, and he threw sulfuric acid into his face. Right? These acid attacks are on the rise in the UK. The past 3 or 4 years, they've had lots of incidents. And it was a mistake. The guy was given the wrong address, right? Talk about being unlucky. So then, he was in critical care for about 2 weeks. The doctors expected that he wouldn't survive. Then he went on to perform 12 surgeries. Mostly, they would take skin from his scalp and the back of his neck to try and restore the damage that had happened to his face. His face was gone. After 12 surgeries, look him up, Google this guy. After 12 surgeries, it's still very difficult to even look at his face. So he's then asked, they say to him, what was the hardest part in this entire ordeal? Was it the excruciating, unspeakable pain? Was it the issues that your parents had to, your family had to go through, your wife and your children? Is it the irreparable damage done to your appearance? Is it the fact that you were on the brink of death? Which is it? He said, no, it was none of these. It's the fact that I no longer have eyelids. He said, I can't go to sleep. It's like your eyes are always open. How do you sleep when your eyes are always open? SubhanAllah. You feel you're drifting away from God? Maybe think about all the things He has given you and all the things He has chosen not to give you, which actually turns in your best interest in the long run. The blessing of the tongue. There was this guy that I met in the holy city of Mashhad. SubhanAllah, he couldn't speak. And a guy asked him, he said, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Immediately he got up from his place with his eyes pouring down. He looked up, he held the tip of his tongue. It was such an emotional scene. He pointed to the sky, he held the tip of his tongue, and he goes, basically saying, all I want is maybe an inch worth of tongue tissue. So I could speak, I could tell my kids that I love them. Brothers and sisters, am I kidding myself? I'm drifting away from God? The only reason that would happen is if I'm so distracted by my own little world, this bubble of self-pity, that I forget and I neglect the fact that I have so much that I'm ungrateful for. A cousin of mine, and these are personal stories, I'm sure you can find dozens of them in your own lives. All you got to do is open your eyes and think. He's my cousin. They have a child, a son. He's, I think, 5 years old now. Last year they diagnosed him with type 1 diabetes. Now you might think type 1 diabetes, no big deal, come on. Medicine is so advanced now, they can take care of it. But you don't understand. You don't understand the fact that they have to wake him up about 4 times every night just to test his blood sugar level. Try and convince a 5-year-old that this isn't for your own good. And not just to wake him up to give him a pill, but to actually draw blood so they can check his blood glucose level. Try and fathom the fact that they have to go to his school about twice a day just to check for his blood glucose level. Try and wrap your head around the fact that this child just doesn't understand why he's being poked so many times every day and there's blood being drawn from him. He just doesn't get it. Try and explain the fact that he can't have candy like every other kid. He can't have ice cream whenever he feels like it. That he can't touch these foods. He can't be a normal baby, a normal child at the age of 5. Brothers and sisters, we are drowning with God's blessings. We just don't get it. It's like a fish in the water. If you told a fish that there is water around you, the fish is going to be like, what's water? Right? What's water? Because you're swimming in it. You're drowning in it. Remind yourself of God's grace. وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِآلَائِي. God says in the Quran, Prophet Musa says to God, God, how do I make people like you? The first sign of trouble, and who do you blame? Who do we blame? He said, how do I make people like you, O God? He said, remind them of my blessings. Remind them of what I've given them. The point here is, it takes some time. People now talk about how you should wake up early in the morning and meditate. I think we pray, and that's great, but we also need to meditate. In other words, pray with focus. Pray with attention about why is it that you pray. The moment you're able to create that spark, to light that candle, to really enjoy thanking God for His blessings. You know, people who wake up for Salatul Layl, for example, or as it's sometimes called Salatul Tahajjud, you know, the 11 rak'ah that most of us never get to do. I often say that it's a great idea, you know, maybe do it every Friday night. Maybe do it one Friday night per month. It only takes about half an hour. But there are people who do it every single night. How? Most of us struggle with Salatul Fajr. Most of us struggle to wake up before sunrise so we can pray what's obligatory. How is it that someone is able to wake up and perform all those prayers while everybody is sleeping in their cozy beds? Do you know how? They enjoy it. They're able to fully immerse themselves in the reality that is the infinite, endless blessings of God, that they don't really need any motivation or encouragement. They wake up without an alarm clock. Because they get it, they understand that this is me speaking to God. The mere fact that God has allowed me, has permitted me to speak to Him is a blessing in and of itself. Imagine if the president gave you his private number and said you could call whatever you want. Imagine, would you not use that opportunity? God is saying you can call me whatever you want. There's a hadith that says a sign of a man's loyalty is to recite the Quran. Think about that for a moment. Why is reciting the Quran a sign of a person's loyalty? Well, it's a sign of your loyalty because if you've ever been friends, and of course you have, but especially the younger you are, imagine for example, it's your first day at school. You show up, you're all alone, you don't know anyone. You might also happen to be the little chubby kid as well. True story. And you go there and because you don't know anyone, you feel so lonely. Now, how many friendships, especially in first grade or in kindergarten, start like this? One of the kids approaches the other kid and she says to her, do you want to be friends? That's literally what God says. أَنَا جَلِيسُ مَنْ لَا جَلِيسَ لَهُ. I'm here to sit with you if you have no one else to sit with you. Do you want to be friends? So it's a sign of loyalty. If your friend texted you and you didn't respond in like 2 seconds, they'd get upset, wouldn't they? If you say, I was too busy, I didn't call back, what you're really saying is, I had more important things to do than to talk to you. So that's it. That's the end of the relationship. That's the end of the friendship, right? Between husband and wife, you have to be proactive. You have to respond to the text even before the text comes to you. Now God sends it to text called Quran. The least we could do is read it every once in a while. The holy month of Ramadan is coming, brothers and sisters. It's the month of the Quran. My point is, you feel yourself drifting away, pick yourself up and drag yourself back to the right track. Remind yourself, because, and I'll wrap up with this, because if God loves you, this is a pretty profound thought, just bear with me. If God loves you, then He will put you back on track whether you like it or not. In other words, you experiencing that awakening and that restoration of faith will come by force or by your own choosing. If He truly loves you, He'll force you back on track. How? A loved one's death. That usually is sufficient to wake us up, isn't it? Some debilitating chronic illness. I mean, that's the whole reason why we go through these things. That's the philosophy of ibtila, the philosophy of tribulation, of trials. It is not to punish us, because this world was never designed to be a place of torment. There's a massive body of literature, both in the Quran as well as in the traditions of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, which clearly say, hey, if you think you're being punished, you're mistaken. This world lacks the capacity for punishment and reward. I've talked about this in previous lectures at length. This world is physically incapable of punishing people like Saddam, or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, or Hitler, or the tyrants. It's not enough. No matter what you do, it's just not enough. And it's physically incapable of rewarding the people who are righteous and good. It's not enough. If God gives the whole world to people like Fatima al-Zahra, for example, or righteous companions of the Imams, it's just not enough. So what it really is, it's like someone slightly punishing you to say, hey, slow down. Turn around. You're going in the right direction. That's all it is. So, before God forces us back on track through trials and tribulations and sicknesses and diseases and financial crises and problems, let's awaken ourselves first. It's just you save yourself a whole lot of heartache and anger and pain and misery. I thank you very much for your attention. May Allah bless you all, and may we be in constant remembrance of God's everlasting, infinite, endless grace and blessing. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.